Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back, and I'm so excited to talk to y'all about DC20 today. Okay, DC20, what is it? Let's go ahead and start there, because some of you are not going to know what I'm talking about, and the claim that the title of this video makes, might incite a few things. So DC20 is a brand new ttrpg system created by the Dungeon Coach, and let me tell you, I am just genuinely so thrilled for this system. It is a D20 system, so it does use a very similar system in terms of what Dungeons and Dragons use, where you roll a D20, you hit DCs to attack, to cast spells, to, make checks, things of that nature. It all follows that general line. But there are a lot of things that DC20 does differently than other systems such as D&D, which is obviously what we're going to be comparing it to today. And I want to give you the top 3 reasons as to why you should really be looking into DC20 and making the switch possibly now. Now, to go ahead and give a few of the disclaimers, okay, DC20 had a Kickstarter very recently that just ended not that long ago, and while backing the Kickstarter, you got access to these, as you can see, beta 0.8 rules. This is inherently a version of the game that, while has most of your core concepts, things are subject to change, right? All those usual disclaimers. When it comes to the classes, he hasn't released every single bit of, evolution and a thing for every single class. So there's going to be things added that aren't even here yet. But for what I'm talking about today, this will do just fine. And this is going to get my point across, and you'll see just why this system gets me so pumped. Now, one of the single biggest things in Dungeons & Dragons that, at least for me personally, has always bothered me is I always knew there had to be a better way to handle and do combat, right? I think the system itself is okay because it's simplistic, which can be nice, which is like you have your movement, you have an action, bonus action, and then a reaction that you can sometimes use. And that's great, that's cool, that's wonderful. But overall, for someone who really enjoys the combat side of Dungeons & Dragons, especially if you know my background, I've literally run like PvP tournaments and stuff, which, hey, while D&D systems aren't necessarily made for PvP, it's things that I enjoy. It's what I really like exploring and testing out. And let me tell you, this action point combat resource system that DC20 has is it is chef's kiss. It is so good. So what makes it different? What makes it better? And, we can be honest here and what possibly can make it worse in some people's eyes. So one of the biggest complaints you'll see for D&D when it uses its action bonus action system is, well, what do I do with my bonus action or my action on my turn, right? There are some things that are locked to actions, right? And you'll do something that's really cool and you get this one action and you'll have this floating bonus action that just like sits there. And for some classes, you won't use it for a while or sometimes ever, which just feels bad, right? You have this thing that sits there and just like never gets touched, never gets used. With the action point system, you get 4 action points, and these action points are what is going to determine your turn as a whole because they are what you use for everything. It keeps it very simple in that. Do you want to move? All right, use one of your action points to move a little bit. Do you want to attack? All right, use one of your action points to attack. Do you want to, drink a potion? Do you want to help a teammate? Use one of your action points, right? It's so amazing. It's so sick. It's so well done because it gives you so much creative freedom. One thing I really like is, in D&D, you have 30 feet of movement on average for your character every single turn. Well, if you're playing I want to hit thing barbarian, and you run up and start hitting something, well, your movement every single turn is just useless. You're not gonna run around more than likely. You're already where you want to be. So when it comes to something like DC20, you don't have to feel like you're wasting this resource. Your movement resource can now turn into an additional attack. It can now turn into gaining an advantage, right? And I'm gonna have videos going more in depth of all of these points and more for DC20. I'm just trying to give a baseline overview, but this action point system is not only super simple to understand because you just use one of your 4 action points for whatever you want to do, but it gives you so much creative freedom and makes things like taking a dodge action not feel bad, right? You're running around, you don't have anything to do with your action, you go, okay, I'll dodge. And that's it. And it doesn't feel good, but now in this system, there's I forget the exact terminology, but a partial dodge, which you can do for 1 action point. There's a full dodge, which acts as the usual dodge action in D&D for 2. And then you have 2 more that you can still use to do something. You don't just burn your whole action dodging. So I'm gonna calm down on the ranting because I can keep going on this for a while. But the action point system, oh, so good. Now, all that being said, because I want to be fair and I don't want to just sit here and hype a system up because nothing is perfect, the one downside I can really see of something like an action point system, the main flaw, the main issue, is that it is slightly more complex than something like movement action bonus action, right? That in itself is pretty nice because you just do these 3 things and you just use your action and that's it, you're done, rather than having 4 action points. I still think overall this action point system that they've created is simple enough to where you don't get bogged down. But for someone that maybe has a lot of issue with choice paralysis, which is basically where you have so many options you don't know what to do, this system can occasionally do that. I don't think it super has that problem, but I can see that being an issue for some players where choice paralysis hits you pretty hard. Now, one thing that can sound like a turnoff, but I think is really solid, is the system has a few more rules than D&D, just kind of objectively speaking. But what is really, really nice, and kind of my main point to here, is the cohesion of these rules and how everything just flows together and makes sense. And the best example I have for this is the degrees of success and failure. And here you can read degrees of success. I'll scroll down. If you want to pause for a second and read degrees of failure, there you go, you have that. But, you know, I'll explain it for those of us that might be illiterate. What are you gonna do? Now, degrees of success and failure is basically a system saying whenever there is a DC to a check, if you beat it by 5 or miss it by 5, each step of 5 you go up or down is another degree of that success or failure. So when making a normal check, right, if you go 5 up from that DC, well, that's great, that's awesome. You know, did way better than that check. You now get this added bonus to it maybe. Or if you beat it by 10, it's like, oh my gosh, you absolutely crushed this DC. You did some of the best work you could imagine on this check, right? And this is really, really nice because really high rolls that aren't nat 20s still get rewarded, right? Let's say you have a +6 to your cooking skills, right? And you end up rolling a 19, which is a 25, and the DC was 20. Well, usually in a normal D&D system, hey, you passed the check. You successfully baked this cake you were trying to make. But in this system, what it really aims to do and aims to push the GMs to do is to reward their players for getting that 5 above. So because you hit 25 on a DC 20, well, this isn't just a cake, this is an amazing cake. Your decorations that you managed to put on it with the different fondant look better than any cake you've baked in the past couple months, right? Like something like that, something that really adds to it. Now, again, with my cohesion of rules thing that I was talking about, when it comes to attacking and things like that, one thing the system has is no damage dice, which this is something I'm going to talk about in an entire separate video. Don't freak out when I say no damage dice, okay? I truly believe that it's for the better. I'll go into that later. The Dungeon Coach also has some videos on it. But when it comes to rolling for an attack, right? If I rolled a hit and this person's, you know, AC, I think they have another word for it in the system, but we're just going to use AC because we know what that is, right? Their armor class is 15 and you roll a 20. If your weapon would usually deal 2 damage, because you rolled 5 over, you deal another damage on top of it. So again, we're rewarding these good rolls. One of the worst feelings you can have when attacking a creature is, like I talked earlier, you roll that 19, you absolutely crush its AC, it was an amazing roll, you feel great, and you get to roll your dice, and you deal on your 1d12 1 damage. Or even worse, you crit, you get 2d12, and you roll 2 1s. And it's like, okay, you crit, but you also only deal the 2 damage plus your modifier. Like, that feels so bad. Like, just objectively speaking, that is one of the worst feelings ever, because it's like, it is the most, like, let down of a turn you can imagine. So, because of that, this system helps alleviate that. So when you roll really high, including not just criticals, which, by the way, criticals rolling a nat 20 has an additional benefit on top of it, so don't worry, that's not removed. But when you go those steps over, you get rewarded. So it just makes you feel good for your rolls being high. Granted, it also hurts it when it's a worse roll, But I think for the most part, that just makes it more fun because your rolls actually matter being high or low versus just hitting that DC. There's a lot more to it, and it just cohesions together. It just makes sense because all of these follow that same rule set. So again, the point of this, sorry, I really got stuck on that system. The point of this is to say that the way attacking works, the way rolling for other checks works, the way rolling your d20s to hit these DCs works, they all work cohesively. Whereas in something like D&D, there's a lot of rules that will conflict each other, and like rolling to break down a door or something like that might be different than rolling to hit an attack, and rolling higher or lower doesn't matter on those things, but it matters for everything in this system, right? It all flows together and it all works. So let's talk about what I think to be the single best and most important change to this system, and that is the attributes and prime modifiers. For one, they got rid of the silly like, oh, I have an 18 strength, but that's really only a +4. It's just whatever the number is, right? It just makes sense. If you have a 2 might, then you have a inherent +2 to your might checks, right? It's not like this arbitrary, like I have this number, but it really just means this plus, which I then add to this thing, right? It gets rid of that. But there's 4 main attributes. We have might, agility, intelligence, charisma. You can see that we removed wisdom and removed con, so they removed 1 physical and 1 mental thing. Overall, I think it's just a lot cleaner. And then one thing that I really appreciate is that all of these modifiers actually have a reason to have them. Which sounds silly, but giving an example, right, of some kind of intelligence-based magic class in D&D, you had basically 0 reason to put points into something like strength, right? Like you would just dump it, because maybe the one thing it would matter is like your encumbrance and what you can hold, but like most of the time DMs aren't being super stingy and mean about that anyway, and you also don't need to carry that many things as a spellcaster, so like who would care, right? And you would just dump it, and then it's like, what's the point? Whereas now, these 4 all have important things. So as you can see, like your might is added to your maximum health points. Your agility is added to your physical defense. Your charisma is added to your mystical defense. Yes, there's 2 types of defenses here. Or then your intelligence is also added to your mystical defense, right? Things like this. So they all kind of have this purpose that will shape your character, whether they are good or bad, which is really, really nice. But the main point here is this little thing that they call the prime modifier. And this is what allows your characters to be whatever you want. So what is the prime modifier? Well, your prime modifier is basically your highest stat. Doesn't matter what class you are. If you're a barbarian and your intelligence is your highest stat, your prime modifier is now your intelligence, okay? So, as you can read, your prime modifier is what affects your attack checks, your spell checks, your save DCs, and your awareness checks. There's no more perception, nonsense, garbage, whatever. And as it says here, just because the barbarian in the group has high charisma instead of might, doesn't mean he's worse at swinging a sword because of it, which is so nice, okay? You can have whatever build you want and it will still function and work. Granted, if your barbarian is something like might-based, right, and you can read, it kind of goes into different things to talk about it, but if you go an intelligence-based barbarian, you might be not great at like grappling enemies, right, because that's still a might check. You still have to physically be able to do that. You might not be great at shoving people, but your sword skills aren't going to hinder because of it. Your ability to hit and deal damage doesn't lessen just because you don't force yourself and pigeonhole yourself into a certain kind of build, which is so sick because you can now flavor your characters however you want. If you want an intelligence-based barbarian, go for it. And your whole thing can be, he's just extremely intelligent on the battlefield and has learned to such a high degree how to mentally use his sword to block things and like put it in the perfect spot to avoid enemies' defenses and things like that, right? You can roleplay characters however you want them to roleplay, and it doesn't make your character suck because of it. Because that was one of the, I feel, most painful parts of D&D, is if you wanted a certain build or you had this like certain idea in your head for what you wanted to do, sometimes it just wouldn't work. It just wouldn't function, because if you really shoved all of your points into intelligence in a D&D barbarian, well, you would just suck at using weapons, and unless you really found some like weird nonsensical way around it, you would just kind of be objectively worse in almost every combat situation than most of your fellow peers. But this system stops that. And not only that, but the prime modifier system really helps scale everyone at an equal level. Yes, just like every system, there will still be some kind of min-maxing, and you'll still probably be able to like mess with some things and change the way some things work. But because of like this attribute limit, which forces you to not go higher than a +3 from level 1 to 4, a +4 from, you know, level 5 to 9, and things like that, it doesn't mean that the one min-maxer at the table that rushes his one stat to level 20 is just doing hits more often and hits harder than everyone else at the table. No, because almost everyone should have a +3 in one of their attributes, especially if you're just using standard array, or everyone's gonna probably have a +4 by the time you get to a certain point. You can still make a well-rounded character that doesn't have that +4, but you'd be kind of silly not to just put one more point into your best stat to make it that much better, right? The prime modifier system just opens the door to so much possibility and so much character diversity that D&D doesn't really allow for, that I can't even begin to explain. I need to stop because I can just probably rant about this one simple thing forever, but that's what future videos are for. So there you have it. Those are your top 3 reasons why you should really be looking into DC20. If you can't tell, I am so excited about this system. I think this system is awesome. I think it allows for so many things that I didn't even get to mention in this video because I wanted to keep it to 3 so it wasn't an hour long of me just like gushing over what I think is amazingness of this system. But nonetheless, I hope you're excited. I hope you're ready for more videos where I really do deep dives into things like the action point system, and I'm going to explain that more in depth. The, you know, critical success, critical failures, right? Your +5s, -5s, and then even things like your attributes and prime modifiers, I'm going to do explanations of. When it comes to classes and things of that nature, I'm going to talk about them a little bit, but you're not going to see me super get into them until he releases the updated set of rules that start to introduce the subclasses. Because as of right now, what we have, I believe, only about half of the classes that will be available at full release of DC20. And again, for all of those classes, we only have really their level 1 and 2 features. We don't have anything super past that. We understand what the basic leveling tree is, and that might be something I talk about, but we don't know what their subclasses are, which is obviously like a huge important piece of the puzzle when it comes to making builds and having classes and things like that. So nonetheless, I hope y'all enjoyed. I hope y'all now are as excited for DC20 as I am, and I can't wait to see you guys on the next one. Peace out. Don't forget to subscribe.